The camper door swung open with a metallic groan that cut through the thick South Carolina air. March 3rd, 1989. 2 days of desperate searching, 2 days of a community holding its breath. And now, as the flashlight beam swept across the cramped interior, Detective Mike Richardson knew they were about to find something no one wanted to see. "Check the cabinets," someone said behind him. That's when he saw it. A small hand, pale, lifeless, jutting out from behind a cabinet door that shouldn't have been closed. Justin Lee Turner, 5 years old, folded into a space meant for pots and pans, strangled, hidden, less than 100 yards from where he slept every night. The sheriff would later say, "I can't think of a more tragic, horrendous murder." But standing there in that cramped camper, Richardson wasn't thinking about statements or press conferences. He was thinking about one thing. Whoever did this knew this property, knew this camper, knew this family, because here's what made his blood run cold. Justin had been reported missing by his own stepmother. She said she put him on the bus, but the bus driver said he never showed up. The autopsy would reveal he died that same morning, before the bus ever came, before the search parties ever formed, before anyone pretended to look for a boy who was already dead and hidden in plain sight. So the question wasn't just who killed Justin Turner. The question was who killed him, hid his body on their own property, and then had the nerve to report him missing. That question would haunt investigators for 35 years. It would lead to arrests in 2024. It would end with dismissed charges, no convictions, and no justice. And it all started in that camper, with a little boy stuffed in a cabinet, killed by someone he trusted. This is the story of how a 5-year-old's murder went unsolved for over 3 decades, and how the people everyone suspected walked free. Before we dive into this story, do me one small favor. Hit that subscribe button and smash the like. It helps this community grow and makes sure stories like this one aren't forgotten. This case took decades to crack, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss a single detail. Also, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how many people around the world care about justice just as much as I do. Justin Lee Turner was just 5 years old. 5, that's kindergarten age, the age when kids lose their first tooth, learn to tie their shoes, and believe their parents can protect them from anything. March 3rd, 1989, Berkeley County, South Carolina, a Friday morning that started like any other, but ended in a nightmare that would haunt a community for over 3 decades. The sun came up that morning like it always did. Justin's older siblings got ready for school. The yellow school bus would be making its rounds soon, stopping at the Turner property to pick up the kids. But here's where things get weird, real weird. Justin never made it onto that bus. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, he missed the bus. Kids miss the bus all the time, right? Maybe he was running late. Maybe he was sick. But hold that thought, because what his stepmother told police doesn't add up, not one bit. She reported him missing that same day, claiming she put him out for the bus like she always did. Said she watched him walk toward the bus stop. Said the bus just never picked him up. But here's the kicker. The bus driver had a different story. The attendance records, they told investigators something that made their blood run cold. Justin Turner never got on that bus. He never even made it to the bus stop. So where the hell was he? The family property wasn't huge, but it had places to hide, outbuildings, sheds, and one small camper sitting out back. You know the type, those old recreational campers from the 70s and 80s that families would take on road trips before everyone had smartphones and streaming services. This one wasn't going anywhere though. It was just sitting there, rotting on the Turner property. For 2 days, search parties combed through Berkeley County. Volunteers, law enforcement, neighbors, everyone was looking for this little boy. His face was on the news. People were checking their yards, their barns, anywhere a confused 5-year-old might have wandered off to. And the whole time, Justin was less than 100 yards from his own house. March 3rd, 1989. 2 days after he vanished. That's when they found him, inside that camper, stuffed inside a cabinet, strangled to death. Let me paint you a picture of what investigators walked into that day, because this is where this case goes, from mysterious disappearance to full-blown homicide. And trust me, it's about to get dark. The camper door creaked open, musty smell, years of neglect, dust particles floating in the beams of flashlights. The investigators started searching, under cushions, in closets, checking every nook and cranny of this tiny mobile home. Then someone opened a cabinet, a small cabinet, the kind you'd store pots and pans in, and there he was, Justin Lee Turner, 5 years old, curled up in a space so small that whoever put him there had to fold his little body to make him fit. He'd been strangled with a ligature. That's cop speak for something wrapped around the neck and pulled tight. A rope, a cord, a belt. Something that squeezed the life out of a kindergartner. The sheriff who worked that scene said something that still echoes today. I can't think of a more tragic, horrendous murder, but here's what made investigators' skin crawl. Here's what made them look at the family and start asking hard questions. Whoever killed Justin knew that property. They knew about that camper. They knew about that cabinet. And they had enough time after killing him to hide his body, stage a missing child report, and act like they had no idea what happened. This wasn't some random predator who snatched a kid off the street. This was personal. This was close to home, literally. The autopsy revealed details that narrowed down the timeline, based on the contents of Justin's stomach, what he'd eaten for breakfast that morning, and other forensic evidence. Investigators concluded that death occurred within hours of when he was last seen alive. That morning, March the 3rd, before the school bus ever came. So let's do the math here. If Justin died that morning, and his stepmother was the last person to see him alive, and the bus driver said he never showed up, and his body was hidden on the family property. You seeing where this is going? Victor Lee Turner, that's Justin's father, the man who was supposed to protect his son, and Megan Turner, though back in 1989, she went by a different name. She was Justin's stepmother, the woman who raised him, the woman who reported him missing. When police start investigating a child murder, they always look at the family first. Statistics don't lie. Most kids who are killed by someone they know, someone they trust, and in the Turner household, things weren't adding up. First red flag. Victor Turner, the father, allegedly asked investigators a question that made them do a double take. He asked what would happen if someone in the family had harmed the boy. Think about that again. What would happen if someone in the family harmed the boy? Who asked that question? Who even puts that possibility out there unless it's already swimming around in their head? Second red flag. The stepmother admitted, straight up admitted, that she had an altercation with Justin that morning, the morning he died. Now, she tried to downplay it, call it a normal discipline thing, just a rough morning with a difficult kid. But this was the last morning of Justin Turner's life, and she's admitting things got physical. Third red flag. The ligature. Investigators found a ligature at the Turner home. Could have been a dog collar and leash. Could have been something else. The reports vary, but here's what doesn't vary. Forensic techs analyzed the fibers from that ligature and compared them to Justin's shirt, the shirt he was wearing when he died. They matched. The fibers from a ligature in the Turner home matched the fibers found on the dead boy's clothing. That's not coincidence. That's evidence. But here's where this case gets absolutely wild. Despite all of this, the suspicious behavior, the admission of conflict, the fiber evidence, the body hidden on their own property, nobody went to jail. Not in 1989, not in 1990, not for over 30 years. The 1990s were a different time for forensic science. DNA analysis was still new. Fiber matching wasn't as sophisticated. And in Berkeley County, South Carolina, prosecutors looked at the evidence they had and made a decision. They charged the stepmother, the woman now known as Megan Turner, though she had a different name back then. They brought charges. They prepared for trial. And then the case fell apart. The charges didn't stick. Prosecutors couldn't make it work. Maybe the evidence wasn't strong enough. Maybe witnesses weren't credible enough. Maybe the defense poked too many holes in the investigation. Whatever the reason, the stepmother walked. No conviction, no justice for Justin, and life went on. But not really. Because here's the thing about unsolved child murders in small communities. They don't just fade away. They fester. They create suspicion that hangs over families like a dark cloud for decades. Victor and Megan Turner lived their lives under that cloud. Everywhere they went, people whispered, "That's the family where the little boy died. That's the dad who asked that weird question. That's the stepmom who had the fight with him that morning." Justin's biological mother, she died young. The trauma, the grief, the weight of losing a child in such a horrific way. It takes a toll that most people can't even imagine. The siblings grew up in the shadow of their brother's murder. Can you imagine that? Going through middle school, high school, your 20s and 30s, always being the kid whose brother was murdered in the camper. And the case just sat there, cold, unsolved, filed away in some evidence room, collecting dust like that camper collected rust. For 32 years, the world's dealing with a pandemic. Everyone's wearing masks, and true crime podcasts are blowing up. And in Berkeley County, South Carolina, a cold case unit decides to crack open a file that's been sitting dormant since 1989, the Justin Lee Turner case. New investigators, fresh eyes, and here's the game changer, new forensic technology. See, fiber analysis in 2021 is light years ahead of where it was in 1989. Same with DNA testing, same with digital evidence reconstruction. These cold case detectives started going through every piece of physical evidence that had been preserved, every witness statement, every photograph from the original scene, and they started building a case. They re-examined that ligature, ran new tests on the fibers, looked at the timeline with modern investigative techniques. Interviewed family members again, cross-referenced stories, checked for inconsistencies that might have been missed 3 decades earlier. By 2024, they believed they had enough. January 2024, arrest warrants issued. Victor Lee Turner, the father, now in his 60s, Megan Turner, the stepmother, also decades older, living a life far removed from that horrific morning in 1989, both charged with murder. The same murder, the murder of 5-year-old Justin Lee Turner. 35 years later, the handcuffs finally clicked. The perp walk finally happened. The mugshots finally got taken. After more than 3 decades of living under suspicion but never being held accountable, Victor and Megan Turner were going to face trial for killing a little boy, or so everyone thought. Here's where this case takes a turn that's going to make you question everything about the justice system, about cold cases, and about what happens when too much time passes between a crime and accountability. The defense attorneys for Victor and Megan Turner came out swinging, and their argument wasn't My clients didn't do it. Their argument was way more strategic, way more devastating to the prosecution's case. Their argument was, you can't prove they did it, not now, not after 35 years. Let's break down what they argued, because it's both legally brilliant and morally complicated. First, tunnel vision. The defense claimed that investigators, from day one, zeroed in on the parents and never seriously looked at anyone else. They had their suspects, they had their theory, and they worked backward from there, cherry-picking evidence that fit and ignoring evidence that didn't. And here's the kicker. They might have been right, because while police were focused on the Turners, there was another possibility that nobody wanted to talk about, a possibility that would change everything if it were true. Richard Marks Evans. If that name doesn't ring a bell, let me fill you in. Richard Marks Evans was a serial killer operating in the region during the late 80s and early 90s. His M.O. abducting young girls, strangling them, hiding their bodies. He was a predator, a monster, and he was active in areas not far from Berkeley County during the exact time frame when Justin Turner died. The defense brought up Evans and said, did investigators ever seriously consider that this could have been a stranger abduction, that this could have been a serial killer passing through? Or were they so convinced it was the parents that they never looked elsewhere? That's reasonable doubt right there. That's the kind of alternative theory that makes juries pause. Second, the evidence problem. Remember that fiber analysis that supposedly matched the ligature to Justin's shirt? The defense argued that this wasn't new evidence at all. It was new conclusions drawn from old evidence. They took the same fibers that existed in 1989, ran them through modern tests, and came up with results that supported the prosecution's theory. But here's the thing about forensic science. It's not always as definitive as CSI makes it look. Fiber analysis, in particular, can be subjective. Two experts can look at the same fibers and draw different conclusions. And when you're basing a murder charge on fiber analysis done 35 years after the crime, you better hope that evidence is absolutely bulletproof. It wasn't. Third, and this is the big one, the witness problem. 35 years is a long time, a really long time. People die, people move away, memories fade, physical evidence degrades, and when you're trying to defend yourself against murder charges, you need to be able to call witnesses who can corroborate your story, who can provide alibis, who can testify about what they saw or heard. But when those witnesses are dead or suffering from dementia or simply can't remember details from 1989, you're screwed. The defense argued that Victor and Megan Turner couldn't get a fair trial, not because they were guilty or innocent, but because too much time had passed. The evidence that might have exonerated them was gone. The witnesses who might have supported their version of events were unavailable. And in the American justice system, you have a right to a fair trial. Even if you're accused of murdering a 5-year-old, even if everyone thinks you did it, you still have rights. June 2024, a courtroom in Berkeley County, prosecutors, defense attorneys, family members of Justin Turner, and the defendants themselves, all waiting to hear what the judge would decide. Would Victor and Megan Turner finally face trial for a murder committed in 1989? Would Justin's family finally get their day in court, their chance at justice? Judge Robert Young made his ruling. Charges dismissed. Not just dismissed. Dismissed with prejudice. You know what that means? It means they can't be refiled. Ever. It means Victor and Megan Turner can never be charged with Justin's murder again, no matter what new evidence might surface, no matter what witnesses might come forward. It's over. The judge's reasoning? He found that the prejudice to the defendants far outweighs any reasons for the delay. Translation: waiting 35 years to bring charges violated the defendant's right to a fair trial. Too many witnesses were gone. Too much evidence was degraded or lost. The prosecution was asking for a conviction based on forensic reanalysis of old evidence and testimony from people whose memories of 1989 were understandably fuzzy. In the judge's view, convicting someone under those circumstances would be fundamentally unfair, regardless of whether they actually committed the crime. Let that sink in for a moment. A judge basically said, maybe they did it, maybe they didn't, but we've waited so long that we can't prove it beyond reasonable doubt anymore, and it would be unjust to try. So where does that leave us? Justin Lee Turner is still dead, still murdered at age 5, still stuffed in a cabinet in a camper where he spent his final moments alone and terrified. Victor and Megan Turner are free, legally cleared, not because anyone proved they didn't do it, but because the system determined it couldn't prove they did. The family is devastated. Justin's cousin, Amy Parsons, spoke to reporters after the dismissal. She said they came to court knowing, I just want the person who murdered Justin to pay for what they did. That person hasn't paid. That person is walking free. Maybe it's Victor and Megan Turner. Maybe it's Richard Mark Evanitz, who died in 2002 in a shootout with police, taking his secrets to the grave. Maybe it's someone else entirely, someone who was never even on the radar. We don't know. And here's the crushing reality. We might never know. This case is officially unsolved. The murder of Justin Lee Turner joins the ranks of thousands of cold cases across America, where the truth is buried deeper than the victims. But this case raises questions that go way beyond one murdered child in South Carolina. Questions about justice, about time, about rights and wrongs that aren't always easy to answer. Question 1. How long is too long? We want cold cases solved. We watch the TV shows. We listen to the podcasts. We cheer when investigators crack cases from decades ago. But what's the statute of limitations on justice? When does the passage of time make a prosecution impossible? Not because of legal technicalities, but because it's genuinely impossible to have a fair trial. If they'd charged the Turners in 1990, right after the initial investigation, they would have had witnesses, fresh evidence, clear memories, but they didn't. They waited 35 years. Is that on the prosecutors for not moving faster, or is that on the investigators for not building a strong enough case back then? Question 2. What do we owe the accused? Even if you believe Victor and Megan Turner killed Justin, even if everything in your gut says they're guilty, they still have constitutional rights. The right to confront witnesses, the right to present a defense, the right to a fair trial. When those rights are compromised by the passage of time, what happens? Do we say, too bad, you're probably guilty anyway? Or do we say, we can't convict you because the process wouldn't be fair? The judge chose the latter. He prioritized the rights of the accused over the desires of the victim's family. That's his job. That's what the Constitution requires. But damn, it's hard to swallow. Question 3. What about alternative suspects? The Richard Mark Evanitz angle is fascinating and terrifying. Here was a known serial killer who operated in the region, who targeted young victims, who strangled them and hid their bodies. The MO fits, the timeline fits, The geography fits. Did investigators give this possibility a fair shake, or did they decide on day one that it was the parents and never seriously pursued other leads? If Evans did kill Justin Turner, then two innocent people lived under suspicion for 35 years. If the Turners did kill Justin, then investigators wasted resources looking at evidence when they should have been building a stronger case against the actual killers. We don't know. And because of how this case was handled or mishandled, we might never know. Question 4. What is justice? Is justice a conviction? Is it a trial? Is it someone sitting in prison for a crime they committed? Or is justice something bigger? Is it truth? Is it accountability? Is it families getting answers? Justin Turner's family didn't get justice in June 2024. They got a dismissal. They got more questions. They got the bitter reality that their 5-year-old cousin's murderer will never face consequences, at least not in this life. Is that justice? Or is that just the best outcome a flawed system could produce 35 years too late? Let's zoom out and talk about cold cases in general. Because Justin's case is part of a much bigger problem in American law enforcement. There are over 250,000 unsolved murders in the United States, 250,000 families who never got closure, never got justice, never got to see someone held accountable for taking their loved one away. Cold case units are supposed to solve these. They've got new technology, DNA analysis that can identify suspects from microscopic traces of blood, forensic genealogy that can track down killers through distant relatives' DNA uploaded to ancestry websites, digital forensics that can pull deleted data from computers and phones. But technology isn't magic, and time is the enemy. Evidence degrades. DNA samples get contaminated or deteriorate over decades in storage. Witnesses die or forget. Physical evidence gets lost when departments move buildings, or when natural disasters strike, or when filing systems fail. Every year that passes makes a cold case harder to solve, and every year that passes makes it harder to prosecute, even when you think you know who did it. The Justin Turner case is a perfect example of this problem. Investigators probably did have their suspicions from day one. The parents were the obvious suspects. Statistics support that. Evidence pointed that way. Behavior was suspicious. But suspicion isn't proof. And in 1989, 1990, they couldn't prove it. So they waited. They hoped for new evidence, new witnesses, new technology that would give them the smoking gun they needed. 32 years later, they thought they had it. New fiber analysis, new forensic techniques, enough to justify arrests and charges. But by then, it was too late. The defense could argue successfully that too much time had passed for a fair trial. The very thing that might have helped the prosecution, new technology, was undermined by the thing that killed the case. The passage of time. It's a catch-22. Wait for better evidence, lose the ability to prosecute too early with weak evidence, risk losing the case and never being able to try again. There's no winning move when a case goes cold. Behind every cold case statistic is a real person, a victim who had dreams and fears and favorite foods and people who loved them. Justin Lee Turner was 5 years old. He should be 40 right now. He should have graduated high school, maybe gone to college, fallen in love, had a career, maybe kids of his own. Instead, he's been dead for 35 years, hidden in a cabinet by someone who saw him as a problem to be disposed of rather than a human being worth protecting. His siblings grew up without him. They had to navigate childhood, adolescence, adulthood, all while carrying the weight of their brother's unsolved murder. Can you imagine what that does to a person? What that does to a family? His mother died without ever knowing who killed her son. She lived with that pain, that uncertainty, that horrible question mark hanging over the most traumatic event of her life. And she died with it unresolved. The extended family, cousins like Amy Parsons, who still advocate for justice, they're left with nothing but frustration and grief that never quite heals because there's no closure, no ending, no punctuation mark on this tragedy. And if Victor and Megan Turner didn't kill Justin, if they're innocent of this crime and spent 35 years under suspicion, 3+ decades of whispers and side eyes, and people crossing the street to avoid them, that's a different kind of hell. That's a life sentence without ever being convicted. That's punishment without trial, suspicion without resolution, guilt presumed by the community, even though it was never proven in court. Either way, this case destroyed lives. The guilty, if they exist, and we know who they are, never faced consequences. The innocent, if that's what they are, never got vindication. The family never got justice. The community never got answers. Everyone lost. Nobody won. Let's dig deeper into the forensic evidence, because this is where the case gets really technical and really fascinating. Fiber analysis. That's what the prosecution hung their hat on. They found a ligature, possibly a dog collar and leash, though reports vary, at the Turner home. They took fibers from that ligature and compared them microscopically to fibers on Justin's shirt. Match. But here's what you need to understand about fiber analysis. It's not like DNA. DNA is unique. Your DNA is different from every other human being on the planet, unless you have an identical twin. DNA is the gold standard of forensic evidence. Fibers? Not so much. Fiber analysis can tell you what type of fiber something is: cotton, polyester, nylon, whatever. It can tell you the color. It can sometimes tell you the manufacturer, but it can't definitively say this fiber came from this specific source and no other source. It's what forensic scientists call class evidence rather than individual evidence. It can narrow down possibilities, but it can't pinpoint with absolute certainty. So when prosecutors said the fibers matched, what they really meant was, these fibers are consistent with coming from the same source, not, these fibers definitely came from the ligature we found at the Turner home. That's reasonable doubt right there. Add to that the question of contamination. Evidence sitting in storage for 35 years. Who handled it? How was it stored? Was it protected from environmental contamination? Did someone's cotton glove touch it at some point, adding foreign fibers to the mix? The defense raised all these questions, and the prosecution had to answer them, and their answers probably weren't as rock solid as they needed to be. Then there's the stomach contents analysis. Investigators said Justin died within hours of his last meal based on what was in his stomach during autopsy, but that science has evolved a lot since 1989. We know now that digestion rates vary wildly between individuals and depend on what was eaten, stress levels, physical activity, and a dozen other factors. Could they really pinpoint time of death that precisely based on stomach contents analyzed in 1989, or was that estimate much fuzzier than investigators wanted to admit? These are the kinds of questions defense attorneys love to ask. These are the kinds of doubts that get planted in jurors' minds. Richard Mark Evanitz. Let's talk about this monster and why the defense brought him up. Evanitz was born in 1963, making him 25 or 26 in 1989 when Justin was killed. He was a former Navy sailor, married, lived in South Carolina during the late 80s. To the outside world, he seemed normal. To his victims, he was a nightmare. Between 1996 and 1997, Evanitz kidnapped and murdered 3 girls in Spotsylvania County, Virginia: Sophia Silva, age 16, Kristen and Caddy Leask, sisters aged 15 and 12. He kept their bodies for days before disposing of them. He was methodical, careful, and terrifyingly successful at evading capture. In 2002, he kidnapped another girl, 15-year-old Kara Robinson. But Kara was smarter and braver than Evanitz anticipated. She escaped, memorized details about his car and apartment, and helped police identify him. When cops tracked him down, he shot himself rather than face capture. After his death, investigators started looking at unsolved cases in areas where Evanitz had lived. And one of those areas was South Carolina in the late 80s. Here's what makes the connection to Justin's case interesting. Evanitz's M.O. involved strangulation. He targeted young victims. He hid bodies. The psychology fits: controlling, methodical, violent. But here's what doesn't fit. Evanitz typically targeted girls, not boys. His known victims were all female, and his crimes were sexual in nature. Justin's murder doesn't appear to have had a sexual component based on available information. Still, serial killers don't always stick to rigid patterns, especially early in their offending careers. If Evanitz killed in 1989, it would have been years before his known murders in 1996, 1997. He could have been experimenting, figuring out his preferences, learning his craft. Did investigators seriously consider Evanitz as a suspect? Or did they mention him once, rule him out for flimsy reasons, and move on because they were already convinced the parents did it? We don't know. And that's the defense's point. When you have tunnel vision on one theory, you miss other possibilities. You don't investigate thoroughly enough. You build a case that seems strong until someone pokes holes in it. So here we are. November 2025. Justin Lee Turner has been dead for over 36 years. His killers, whoever they are, have never been held accountable. Victor and Megan Turner are legally in the clear. They can't be charged again. They're free to live their lives, such as they are after decades of suspicion and 3+ years of facing murder charges. The family is still grieving, still angry, still desperate for answers that may never come. The case is cold again, colder than ever. Actually, because the one realistic shot at prosecution has been dismissed with prejudice, could new evidence emerge? Sure, theoretically. Maybe someone makes a deathbed confession. Maybe a witness who's been silent for decades decides to finally speak up. Maybe some new forensic technique emerges that can definitively identify Justin's killer. But let's be real. The chances of this case ever being solved are microscopic at this point. So what do we take away from all this? First, time is the enemy of justice. The longer a case stays unsolved, the harder it becomes to solve it. Evidence degrades, witnesses disappear, memories fade. If you're going to prosecute, you need to do it when the trail is hot, not 35 years later when everything's gone cold. Second, forensic science is powerful but not magic. New technology can absolutely help crack old cases, but it can't overcome the fundamental problems created by decades of delay. And forensic evidence is only as good as the chain of custody and the analysis methods used. Third, the justice system has competing interests. We want to solve crimes and punish offenders, but we also want to protect the rights of accused people, ensure fair trials, and not convict innocent people. Sometimes those goals conflict, and when they do, the system tends to err on the side of protecting the accused. That's by design. That's what innocent until proven guilty means. Fourth, some questions don't have answers. Some mysteries stay mysteries. Some families never get closure. That's a hard truth, but it's truth nonetheless. Justin Lee Turner's case is now one of those enduring mysteries. We know he was murdered. We know how he died. We have a pretty good idea of when and where. We have suspects who might be guilty or might be innocent, but we don't know for certain. And unless something dramatic changes, we never will. His body is buried. His childhood is a memory preserved in photos and the hearts of people who loved him. His murder remains unsolved, and somewhere out there, someone knows what really happened in that camper on March 3rd, 1989. They know, and they're not talking. That's the horror of unsolved cases. The truth exists. Someone has it, but they're taking it to their grave, leaving behind nothing but questions, grief, and a 5-year-old boy who never got the chance to grow up. Rest in peace, Justin Lee Turner. Your story isn't forgotten. Your life mattered, and somewhere, somehow, maybe the truth will come out. But until then, this case remains what it's been for 36 years, a tragedy without resolution, a crime without punishment, and a family without justice. Do me one small favor. Hit that subscribe button and smash the like. It helps this community grow and makes sure stories like this one aren't forgotten. This case took decades to crack, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss a single detail. Also, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how many people around the world care about justice just as much as I do.